When I set out to learn Japanese, I expected a challenge, but nobody warned me about kanji. If I knew at the start that in order to learn Japanese, I had to learn over 2,000 characters, each with their own meaning, I'd say that's impossible. And at first, I thought it was. I never thought that I'd be able to do it, until I did. And I didn't just learn the meaning of each kanji, I also learned how to write them. I mean, look at all of this. Look at what I've done. Look upon my works, ye mighty in despair. Sorry, I got a bit carried away there. In this video, I'm going to show you how I did it, but first of all, you need to know why I did it. This was me a few months ago. Here I am, feeling optimistic and proud of myself for finally learning both Hiragana and Katakana, the Japanese alphabet. I even made a video documenting my experience, and you know, it wasn't easy, but it took me around 1 week to learn. To some extent, I could now read Japanese. And I thought I was so cool. I mean, here's a funny story. I met a mate of mine for a beer. I'll have an Asahi, please. And I was telling him all about my recent endeavour. Wow, he said, as if you learn all of those characters. Wait, what does that say? He pointed towards the label on my bottle of beer, and when I looked, I instantly recognised the katakana. I was able to pronounce su, pa, do, rai, super dry. Asahi, super dry. Huh, amazing, he said. And wait, what does that bit say? Oh, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I thought you could read Japanese. Well, yeah, but I've never seen that before. Look, I've got to go. That was my first introduction to kanji, the first hurdle. You see, I was somewhat aware that kanji needed to be learned, but to what extent I had no idea. After learning the kana, my plan of action was to begin expanding my vocabulary through using tools such as Anki. Now that I could read and pronounce words, I just had to learn words and their meaning. Now whenever I'm learning anything new, I begin by watching a lot of YouTube videos, and there are some great how to learn Japanese videos out there. There's a lot of different methods and ways of approaching the language, many of which I'm sure we'll discuss, but I decided to download Anki and begin working through a basic starter deck. Specifically this one, Kaishi 1.5k, as recommended by the Penguin guy who I mentioned in my last video. A YouTuber named Trenton who seems to know what he's talking about, so okay, I set all of this up and began learning 10 new words a day.
Wait, hold on. I thought this video was about learning kanji.
Yeah, it is. I'm gonna get to that. I'm just giving you some context.
And also, what the hell is Anki? And like, what do you mean when you say starter deck?
Okay, Anki. There are many videos out there explaining what it is and how to set it up, so I'll spare you the details, but here's a brief explanation.
Anki is a flashcard program that uses spaced repetition, a system that is designed to help you remember things long-term by showing you cards, just as you're likely to forget them. It's really popular amongst Japanese learners because memorizing vocabulary and kanji requires a lot of practice. In Anki, a deck is just a collection of flashcards, right? And so a starter deck is a pre-made set of cards that beginners can use right away without having to make their own. These often cover the basics and are a great starting point.
So like with this starter deck, you are shown a word, or it could be a sentence, and you have to try and recall a word and what it means before revealing the answer. If you get it right, you click good, and if you get it wrong, you click again. And then Anki works its magic and decides when it's best to show you it again. You also get to choose how many new cards you want to learn each day, but you don't want to bite off more than you can chew because you also have to review the cards that you had learned previously. And from experience, it can become quite overwhelming. In order to keep on top of the reviews and consistently learn new words, Anki is something that you do every day. It's like brushing your teeth, right? You're not gonna die if you skip a day, but if you skip a lot of days, then you're gonna suffer. Bad teeth, bad breath, too many Anki cards to review, and not enough time. I'm trying to make this comparison work, but you know what I mean. The best thing you can do is make it a habit. Every morning before I go to work, I sit down at the computer and review my cards like a good little boy. I'm turning pro. There's even an app for Anki, although it does cost quite a bit of money. But being able to review your cards on the go or whenever you get time throughout the day makes it a worthwhile investment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, like, I get it, but, like, I don't get how this is relevant to, like, learning kanji.
You say like way too much. And the reason why all of this is relevant to kanji is because I was working my way through this Anki deck in an effort to learn new words. And I did this for a few weeks, but I would really struggle whenever I came across words that involved, yep, you guessed it, kanji. These stupid characters kept popping up everywhere, and yeah, I would eventually learn and be able to recall these words, but it was beginning to frustrate me, right? Like, I'm the type of guy who likes to understand things, and when it came to these characters, I had no idea what they meant, and so, eventually, I did what no serious language learner should ever do. I stopped doing Anki. The cards piled up. My piles got worse, and I was beginning to think that perhaps learning Japanese was too difficult. But no, I'm not one to give up so easily, and so I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and... what?
Sorry, I was just gonna say, it would probably help if you learnt kanji first.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm getting to. Anyways, what I did was, I went back onto YouTube and began watching videos all about kanji. First of all, what is kanji? Kanji are essentially symbols, characters that are used in Japanese writing that each have a meaning. They represent an idea or thing. And my first thought was, in some way, kanji are like ancient emojis. For example, if you're texting your friends, you'll probably use the laughing emoji to show that you're laughing. Well, in a similar way, there is a kanji for laughter. This one is pronounced warau, meaning to laugh. This comparison is probably a bit of a stretch, but according to ChatGPT, Japanese people will sometimes use this kanji online almost like an emoji. But unlike emojis, kanji is more serious. As mentioned in the previous video, it's an important part of a full writing system. One of 3 scripts that are used in Japanese along with Hiragana and Katakana. When I first learned that they use these 3 scripts together, my first question was, why? It sounded unnecessary. Why overcomplicate things? Just stick to one system. Now, I've already explained the purpose for having both Hiragana and Katakana, and after learning why, I began to understand and slowly began to accept its existence. But who the hell does this kanji think he is, trying to come up in here and get involved?
Wait, dude, that's Kanji. This is actually his party.
There was once a point in time, around 1,500 years ago, when Japan didn't have a written language. That was until Kanji decided to take a trip from China to Japan. This led to the Japanese adopting Kanji and its characters to represent their own language. But of course, this process wasn't simple. It wasn't just a copy and paste, because the Chinese and Japanese languages were, and still are, quite different, and so a lot of modification and changes were made. Like, the pronunciations are different because Japanese sounds are different. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but this is why some kanji can often have 2 kinds of readings in Japanese, called onyumi and kunyumi. Again, it's never simple, is it? At the time of recording this, I don't even understand how or when these 2 readings are used, but I'm sure we'll get to that. So kanji was essentially imported from the Chinese language, and like when copying your friend's homework, the Japanese were like, okay, we'll just use this, but we'll change it a bit and make it our own. And then they were like, this is good, but it's a bit clunky. We could do with something else in order to fill the gaps, let's say. And so then came along Hiragana and Katakana. So we can't really argue with Kanji, right? He was here first. He started the party. All we can do is learn to accept and understand him. which is going to be difficult. Like, at the moment, we're on bad terms, but...
Yeah, I mean, he's not like us, but he's an interesting guy. You should probably go talk to him.
Yeah, you're probably right. Hey, Kanji, come here, I want to talk to you.
Hello. I hope you're all enjoying the party.
Yeah, it's great. Look, here's the thing. I really want to learn more about you. I mean, I'm friends with these guys, but you just seem hard to get along with.
Yes, well, they all say that I'm a difficult man to read.
Well, I do kind of get that. Like, you are a little intimidating.
I do believe that if a person would just spend some time to get to know me, well, then they'd realize I'm not that bad.
Well, that's kind of what I'm expecting, you know? I want to get to know you, so tell me, how many of these characters do I need to learn? Whoa, what's so funny? You're scaring me.
I'd say around 50.
Huh, it's not too bad.
1,000.
Okay, so yeah, whilst over 50,000 kanji exist, thankfully it's not that bad. I mean, it's bad, but it's not that bad, because I don't have to learn all of them. I just need to learn what is called the joyo kanji, the kanji that has been officially designated by the Japanese government for daily use. The kanji that is considered the standard for newspapers, books, and other documents. Thank God for that. So, how many kanji is there in this set of joyo kanji?
Just 2,136.
2,136 different symbols, each with their own meaning and pronunciation. That is what I need to learn. And at the time of recording this part of the video, I've only just started, but I'm making some good progress. This next part of the video is going to be recorded after I have completed this monumental task. Wish me luck. Just 1 pint of Guinness and I'll get a...
Let me guess, a bottle of Asahi.
Yeah, how do you know?
Because you've literally not stopped talking about how you can read the words on the label.
Oh.
Everyone in here knows you've been learning Japanese. It's all you bloody talk about.
Well, some people are interested. They want to know how I did it. How I learnt the joyo kanji in around 3 months. That's why my mates come to see me. Oh, where's he gone? So, I can say with some confidence that I've learned all 2,136 joyo kanji. I mean, I showed you this notebook at the start of the video, and I've pretty much filled 2 of these. And writing out the kanji like this isn't just an idle exercise. I actually know what they mean, all 2,136. And yeah, it's taken me just over 3 months to get to this point, but looking back at this now, it's very gratifying. And I'm able to say that the method I used actually worked. So, what is this method? Well, there is a book that many Japanese language learners will have heard of, and it's called Remembering the Kanji by James Heisig, often called RTK for short. And it's a book that's been around for a while. The first edition was originally published in 1977, and the most up-to-date 6th edition was released in 2011 to include the additional kanji that was added to the joyo kanji list in 2010. Because 2,000 kanji just wasn't enough. This book and Heisig's method is what allowed me to learn how to read and write kanji. A method that I really want to talk about because, well, it works. I would have never expected to be able to remember this many characters, but here I am. I can look at my huge A0 sized kanji poster and tell you what most of them mean. Obviously, I do forget some of the less common ones at times, but that's expected, and through actually applying this knowledge now by practicing to read Japanese text, it will all get easier. Anyways, let me explain the Heisig method. During the 1970s, James Heisig was in Japan learning Japanese, and when it came to kanji, he was frustrated with the traditional study methods. Methods that involved rote memorization, you know, simple drills like writing out the same character 100 times and hoping it sticks. This approach works for Japanese children who spend 12 years immersed in the language, but it's very inefficient for adult foreigners learning from scratch. He had to figure out a better way to learn the kanji quickly, a more efficient method to memorize them. And so against the advice of nearly everyone around him, he continued to study on his own instead of joining one of the beginner classes. He started experimenting with how his own mind retained visual information, and noticed that when he would make a mental image and story for a kanji or its parts, he would be able to recall it days later, especially if it was something funny or strange. He was essentially using his imagination as a mnemonic tool. I briefly discussed the use of mnemonics in my last video when I had learned Hiragana and Katakana. This technique is built upon the same insight, being the fact that the mind has an easier time remembering images and emotions, not abstract data. And so this system he developed relied on imaginative memory, not just visual memory. Along with this, he also realised that kanji are composed of reusable parts that he would later refer to as primitives. And we'll talk about primitives in a moment. These are similar but different to what is known as radicals. When it comes to kanji, a radical is what they call a part of a kanji, and it's used as a way to organise them into groups for dictionaries and whatnot. For example, there's a lot of kanji with the radical for water, these 3 strokes, and so in a way it's like a hint, right? Whenever you see the water radical, there's a good chance that it has something to do with liquid, like river, sea, or swim. As you can see, there is a lot of them. The reason I mention this is because some people assume that what Heisig calls primitives are the same as radicals, but they're not the same. They each have a different purpose. Primitives are recurring parts of kanji that Heisig gives a key word to in order for them to be used as the building blocks to create mnemonic stories. For example, this kanji for rest includes the primitive for person and tree. And, well, a person might rest by a tree. Of course, it makes sense for a lot of these primitives to keep the same meaning as the radicals, but quite often a primitive is invented because it shows up in numerous kanji, therefore it deserves to be a primitive. And I'll give you plenty of examples of how all of this is put into practice later on in the video. Remembering the Kanji Volume 1 includes all of the joyo kanji, and they are all arranged in an order that is based on the shared primitives. Each kanji is given a key word, and then all you have to do is devise a fun, memorable story that includes your key word, along with the keywords for the primitives that exist in that kanji. It's a simple yet effective method for learning so many characters, although I must admit, when I first picked up my copy of RTK and realised that I had 2,136 to get through, I still had my doubts, but having gone through the process, I understand why so many people recommend doing it. When I went onto YouTube and searched up how to learn kanji, there were many videos in which people pointed towards this book, but the one that caught my interest was by a fella named Brit vs Japan. He has a video in which he explained how he had learned over 3,000 kanji in 90 days through using RTK. He also has a guide on his website that he titled How to Learn Kanji Fast, the Ultimate Guide to Remembering the Kanji. It is a very long guide, but I read through it all and was like, hell yeah, this guy knows his stuff, I'll just do what he recommends. Which was to use a spaced repetition system such as Anki alongside RTK. This gentleman was also kind enough to have created a simple RTK flashcard deck, and so I imported that into Anki and boom, we're off to the races. Except you can't race through this process, you have to take it one step at a time, and one kanji at a time, and one day at a time. So now let's talk about my process. For the past 3 months, I've had kanji for breakfast. It's how I start my day. I wake up around 4 AM. Yeah, I know it's early, but it's something that I started doing this year, and I'm intending on making a video about it. But I get up at that time, make a coffee, and sit down at my computer. I open up Anki and begin studying. Now, at first I began by learning 25 new kanji each day, but because you also have to review the previous cards you have learned, this soon started to add up. And it started to take me around 2 to 3 hours just to get through my reviews and 25 new cards. And I was also writing out each kanji whenever it popped up. I just did exactly what Heisig recommended, which was to look at the keyword, try and recall your story, and then write the kanji. I'd then reveal the answer and see if I got it right. Now, I want to give you an example of how effective this primitive system is. Quite early on in the book, we are presented with the kanji for doctor. If you were to just be shown this kanji at the start, you'd probably look at this and think, how can I remember that? There are 12 separate strokes there. But when working through RTK, prior to being shown this kanji, we have already learned the primitives, the parts which build up to that, and so let me show you how easy it is to get here. One of the earliest kanji we are shown is the kanji for 10, right? It's very simple. Now whilst the actual kanji means 10, we also give it a primitive meaning, which in this case is needle. This means that whenever this shows up in another kanji, I can include the keyword 10 or needle in a story for that. But it's even easier than that because soon after we also learn the kanji for rice field, which is in fact a pictograph. It looks like a bird's eye view of a rice field divided into 4 plots. And there's a fair few kanji which are essentially pictographs, right? Again, fairly easy to remember. This is also given the primitive meaning of brain. 1 or 2 pages later, we are given an individual primitive, highlighted by the asterisks, which, you know what this means is that this isn't an actual kanji, it's just a part that exists on other kanji, and it appears so often that it deserves to be a primitive. In this case, the keyword is a drop of. A few pages later, we are shown the kanji for measurement, and this is comprised of 2 things that we already know. The kanji for 10, or its primitive meaning for needle, and then the primitive a drop of, what we've just seen. And so to remember this kanji for measurement, we can make a story that includes those keywords. For example, your story might be, the decimal system uses drops of 10 as a measurement. When adding my story onto Anki, I would always highlight the primitive words used and then the keyword, just to make them stand out. Anyways, we then come to the kanji for specialty. And we've already learnt the primitives that are included here. We have 10, or needle, we have rice field, or brain, and then below this we have what is the full kanji for measurement that we've just learnt. So what this means is that we can even use the keyword measurement as a word in the story that we make up for this kanji. And by doing that we are also reinforcing the story for that kanji as we write it for this one. So here's a story for specialty. After you have chosen your 10 fields of study, measure how good you are at each to find your specialty. And so now we finally come to the kanji for doctor that I had shown earlier, and despite its complexity, you'll notice that it's just made up of all the things that we have already learned. In fact, the part at the right is just the kanji for specialty, and the part to the left is 10 or needle. So again, a simple story for this one might be 10 specialities grants you the title of doctor with a dot. And this story is especially useful because the story itself mentions that this means doctor with a dot, and that helps to prevent confusion with a kanji for just the word doctor that comes later. Anyways, that gives you a good example of how this method is put into practice. These kanji are modular, and the same process is just repeated. The difficulty lies in the fact that there are so many of them. Now, for a while, learning kanji was my main priority, but then, well, after a few weeks, it did begin to feel like a chore. And I mean, that's not really an issue for me, like I was never going to give up, but I must admit it was a bit painful to look at my Anki stats and see how long I had left to go. Even at 2 to 3 hours a day, we are still talking months, right? So, yeah, this is my life now. For the first few hundred kanji, Heisig actually writes out the mnemonic stories for you, and you don't have to use them. In fact, many people suggest making your own up from the start, but I found these to be helpful. He does this to teach you the technique of imaginative memory, but then he eventually stops giving full stories and only provides you with the keyword and primitives that are used. And from that point you have to make up your own stories, which, if done with the necessary thought and effort, it does take more time. I would spend a lot of time trying to think of a story that includes the keywords and primitives, and sometimes this is difficult because of how random some of these words are. Now, thankfully, I wasn't completely alone. There are many people out there who are going through or have gone through this process, and there's a website called Kanji Koohii, which was created to support learners who are doing RTK. There are plenty of community shared stories for each of the kanji, and other users can even rate them based on how good they are. Now, I never actually used Kanji Koohii. Instead I found a handy little website that featured an RTK search engine, which still included all of the community stories from Kanji Koohii, along with a simple animation showing the stroke order. I can't remember how I came across this site, but after I did, it soon became my RTK companion. I made an effort to not just rely on other people's stories though. I'm also used it as a source of inspiration, seeing how other people had managed to form a story out of the keywords. For over a month I kept up with this routine. The hours I had to work before work, my 9 to 5, were dedicated to kanji. At the time of making this video, my YouTube channel is fairly new, right? I had one video made as I was learning kanji, and that was my video about learning the kana. And part of me wanted to make something new and have something to upload instead of letting the channel just stagnate for 3 months until I had finished RTK. And so I made the decision to drop the new kanji I was learning each day to 10 and spend the extra time working on a new video. Just having something new to work on made my mornings just way more enjoyable. The only downside was that I wouldn't be able to get through all the joyo kanji in 3 months. Instead, it would now take longer. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? But even when running a marathon, you need to keep up the pace and not slow down. But I did slow down. There would be days when I'd just do my reviews and not learn any new cards, or some days I wouldn't even get through my reviews. I wasn't just lying around and doing nothing, I was working on that new video. And it wasn't long before kanji became less of a priority. I never completely stopped, but I wasn't on top of it like I was at the start. One weekend I had to go away with work, and I said to myself that, it's no problem, I'll just use the Anki app on my phone. But for the whole weekend I never got 5 minutes to myself. On a coach ride I did get my phone out and try and do a few cards, but it was just hard to concentrate. The guy next to me kept trying to talk to me and I was constantly getting distracted, so I just gave up. And yeah, up until that point I had a nice long daily streak, but I lost it due to going those 3 days without Anki. But, ladies and gents, this was the kick up the arse that I needed, because a week prior to this moment I had finished that video that I was working on, and I could now dedicate all of my time to learning the kanji. And it was on that coach ride that I said to myself, when I get home, I'm gonna finish what I started. I'm not playing around anymore. I'm gonna kick this kanji bastard right in the teeth. And so that is what I did. I returned home with a vengeance, and the next morning I had over 350 cards to review because of the days that I missed, but I just smashed through them. And yeah, it did take me around 5 hours to get through them, but nothing was stopping this train. I even learned an extra 50 new cards, and that's when I made the decision to go all in, and to keep on learning 50 new cards each day. And this is when I really got serious about learning the kanji. It took a lot of effort, but I kept up the pace and was learning 50 new kanji each day, along with doing all of my reviews. We are talking hundreds of cards. Around 4 hours of Anki every morning, and I did this for a few weeks. Slowly but surely I saw that huge number begin to dwindle down. Because I knew that this final push would result in me actually getting through all of the joyo kanji in just over 3 months, I was very motivated. And to my surprise, I was still doing well with my reviews despite the amount of new cards I was quickly adding. This many kanji was like a massive brick wall, and I had to get through it. So every day I was swinging the hammer. And with every swing, I was learning more. I kept this up, and eventually, well, I knocked that wall down. Now knowing the end was in sight, I decided to drop my new cards back down to 10 a day so that I could begin working on this video.
Yo, Hiragana, how's it going?
Hey, Katakana. I'm just calling because, well, I'm wondering if you've heard anything from Dan. It's been months since I last saw him.
Same here. The last time I saw him was at Kanji's party.
We should probably check up on him. What if he's forgotten how to read us?
Oh, he's definitely forgotten. But it won't be long before we hear from him. After all, he needs us.
Yeah, that's true. And he'll probably get fed up of Kanji.
Yeah, Kanji's weird. I don't like that guy.
Well, cheers to you, my friend. This has been a long time coming.
Yes, you should be proud of yourself.
Yeah, well, it's just good to be able to say that I finally understand you, you know?
Well,
I don't even know why people are so intimidated by you. I mean, RTK did take me a while, but the process was rather simple.
Yes, but there is a lot more.
And now I'm one step closer to becoming fluent in Japanese. Give me a second. Hey, here's to life.
Yes, but tell me, how do you read it?
What? It means life.
Yes, you know the meanings behind kanji, but you do not know the readings. You cannot pronounce them.
Yeah, but...
And what about compounds? When we put kanji together, have you learnt those?
Well, no,
Well, then you do not understand me. You only see one side of me.
So despite studying kanji for 3 months, I still can't read this word on the bottle. I do know the separate meanings. For example, the one to the left is the kanji for spicy, and the one to the right is the kanji for mouth. But when you combine kanji together like this, well, it forms a new word with a completely new meaning. And that's why I now need to start learning some words. Also, I did look this up, and this reads karakuchi, meaning dry taste, so yeah. Now it's probably safe to assume that some of you will be watching this video because you want to learn kanji yourself. And well, I've just explained how I've gone about it, so you can do the same as I did or approach it in a different way. And I've heard a lot of people recommend different ways. There's a lot of information out there, people saying to do this and that or to ignore this and whatnot. And when people give advice, it's usually based on their own experience, right? Like if it worked for them, it can work for others. I can't really comment on any other methods because I've not had any experience with them. All I can confidently say from my current position is that RTK does work. And I have some advice for those of you who are thinking about approaching kanji the same way as I have done. First of all, go and read the kanji guide by Brit vs Japan over on his blog because that's what I have basically followed. Except he suggests learning the 3007 kanji, not just the 2200 kanji from RTK Volume 1. That's why the Anki deck that he provides includes that many kanji, because whilst Volume 1 includes the joyo kanji plus a few more, there is also an RTK Volume 3 which includes an extra 1000 kanji if you're a masochist and would like to do more of them. I mean, there's probably some benefit in doing the extra as well, but honestly, I am sick of doing kanji now, and so I have stopped my deck from showing those extra cards. I'll just do them sometime in the future. I mean, I've got the joyo kanji covered, which was my main priority. Now, I've heard some people say that they don't care about learning to write, but you should definitely make the effort to write out the kanji if you are doing RTK. Writing out the kanji as you recall your story helps to strengthen your memory. Now I've not really mentioned stroke order because I'll be honest, I wasn't too concerned about it. I wouldn't stress over minor deviations because look, I had a lot of kanji to get through. That being said, I am still aware of the general principles when it comes to stroke order, being top to bottom, left to right, horizontal before vertical. I did keep all of that in mind as I would write out each kanji. I also recommend using Kanji Koohii in seeing what stories other people have created in order to remember the kanji. As I said, you don't have to copy them word for word, but you can take some inspiration from them, and doing that will save you a lot of time. Also, many people suggest alternative keywords for the primitives that are used. Keywords which are better for making stories in comparison to the ones that Heisig comes up with. For example, the primitive for Fred is one of the most common primitives for kanji, but Fred is a bit of a boring word, right? And so people suggest using the word Spider-Man instead. And as you can imagine, it's a lot easier to make a story that involves the word Spider-Man than it is to make a story that involves the word Fred. Now, my last piece of advice would be to eat that frog. And some of you may have heard this phrase before, and it comes from this quote from Mark Twain. If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. Of course, it's not literally about frogs, it's a metaphor. The frog is the most important or difficult task that you have to do, and so eat that frog means to do that task first, before you get distracted or lose willpower. The first thing that I did each day was go onto Anki to get through my reviews and learn some new cards. Whenever I would put it off and say that I'd do it later, I would always struggle to find the motivation. And so the best thing that I could do was to eat that frog. Get it out of the way, and then I can go on with my day. I honestly do everything in the morning, that's why I like to get up so early. Anyways, this has been a very long video, but that makes sense considering what I have done. I was editing and putting this together alongside learning the kanji as well, and so I'm hoping that the gap between finishing RTK and then being able to upload this isn't too big. In terms of my next steps when it comes to learning Japanese, now that I'm familiar with kanji, I'm going to work my way through that vocab deck and also learn a bit about grammar. It might be a while before I make my next update video, but in the meantime, I do have plans to make some other videos unrelated to language learning, so if you're interested, then keep an eye out. Yeah, wow, this has taken a lot out of me. So I think I'm gonna go rest for a while. So until next time, goodbye.